Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. This is Nona from thealignedlover.com. I have a spoken version of my Fairytale aesthetic Art Nouveau illustrations video. I was trying out a different format last week when I uploaded the music background only version, but I don't think it's as enriching and interactive. So hopefully me discussing it is a lot more enriching. Before we get into the four main artists that I want to focus on, let's just go into a bit of context in terms of the Art Nouveau movement, which I think is so relevant now because it is a reflection of our current times. So Art Nouveau was a rebellion. It was a counterculture against poorly made, overly decorated, mass-produced crafts and arts that imitated motifs of previous eras. It feels so relevant now because many companies are stealing from so many independent artists and different cultures without even maintaining context of the material that they're stealing, and they are creating mass-produced, poorly made replicas and mishmashes. And especially now that we have all of the AI, image generation, content creation at our fingertips, it feels even more relevant that we are rebelling against quantity over quality. So, one of the key figures of the Art Nouveau movement, William Morris, is the man who said, "Have nothing in your house that you do not know to be useful or believe to be beautiful." And he rejected Victorian capitalism and leaned into a more organic style that brought to mind the whiplash line that you see in a lot of medieval eras. It is a line that you might be familiar with if you like to study the angelic or ethereal essence, the S curve. It's a swirling, winding curve that brings to mind vegetation, and it serves as one of the most recognizable themes in Art Nouveau. So just a little comparison, we have Victorian era materials here. We can see that they're a little bit over the top, and then we have the more stylistic and focused Art Nouveau furniture and vases and paintings here. Well, I love both of these paintings, but just the furniture in mind, we can see that there is a clearer style and feeling behind them. Alright, so this is about Art Nouveau illustrations, not Art Nouveau. Unfortunately, if I kept talking about Art Nouveau, it would be like a 5-hour long video. But going back to illustrations, why were the fairy tale illustrations so popular at this time? It's because the Art Nouveau movement coincided with a lot of technological advances that allowed for intricate illustrations to be reproduced more easily and with more fidelity. It sounds a lot like AI content creation, doesn't it? But that was called the Golden Age of Illustration. And what made this so financially, I would say, beneficial for the artists was that gift books, which were deluxe, leather-bound luxury editions of these beautiful fairy tale illustration books, were very popular amongst the middle and upper class. And by the virtue of the Art Nouveau movement, the simple textbook was elevated to an actual art piece. So it wasn't just words and pictures. Everything about the book, from the binding to the cover to the text to the ink itself, was seen as a masterpiece, a piece of art that was meant to be not only read but displayed and collected and cultivated. But we have to keep in mind that nothing exists in a vacuum. Art Nouveau fairy tale illustrations took a lot of inspiration from these three main themes. One, Japanese woodblock prints. We see a lot of flat planes of color, asymmetry, the emphasis of line over shading, and a lot of decorative composition. Pre-Raphaelite art, which honed in on medievalism, romantic tragedy, ornateness, lushness, languid fluidity, and highly detailed and often symbolic flora and fauna, and medieval manuscripts with very decorative borders, illustrations that weaved into the text, a lot of decorated initials. So we can see that these sourced inspirations coincide so strongly with the Art Nouveau Fairytale illustrations. Alright, so our first artist is Arthur Rackham, and he had a very precise style thanks to his major experience as a half newspaper artist, where he was just constantly having to draw and sketch for quantity over quality, but all of these repetitions gave him mastery over his ink, his lines, and there's this certain movement even in his non-shaded, non-colored drawings, and it seems like the ink never dried. The ink is like circulating within the page, the drawing. There's this liveliness to it. There's just so much movement and dynamism and curve in his beautiful illustrations. But beyond that, he has a rather dark style with lots of gnarled, looming trees, very heavy ink shading in the shadows, and I think it creates this very eerie and beautiful fairy world where it's not all like roses and daisies and doves. You get that lovely danger that is missing from, I would say, a lot of modern tellings of fairy tales. Fairy tales are rather grim, dark, eerie, violent, chaotic, and Arthur Rackham's work manages to present that danger in a beautiful way while also presenting such beautiful ethereal fairies, playful little dwarves and elves, cute animals. Really, really beautiful, lovely work. Alright, our next artist is the French Edmund Dulac, and his images are absolutely dreamy. I find that his use of mostly cool tone watercolors allows for the warmer touches to really pop and draw in the eye. His figures are rendered in a very fluid, sensuous, opulent way. His use of shading and color is really rich. And there's this sense that his images are being projected onto gentle ripples of the water's reflection. It's just so almost like transient. It seems like it's a very unreal, and the contrast of the shadows and the non-shadowy portions of his images are not as strong, which creates more of that dreamy quality, I would say, because the borders are not as contrasted as, say, Arthur Rackham's work. Even the fabrics and flora act like ornamentation, so again, very lush, very sensuous. It's intoxicating to look at. Next artist is Kay Nielsen, and he has a very strong background in theater. His father was a director, his mother was a famous actress, and he also worked in the theater, especially with creating sets. And you can see that in his work. There's this very theatrical quality and this ritualistic quality as well. You can really imagine that these figures are mid procession, like mid ritual. It's very, very, I would say, staged for impact in the best way possible. His figures are rendered in a very mythical, elongated, graceful, stylized way. Flora is used both as a graphic motif and as a fully rendered subject. I think his work is moody and elegant. Our last artist is Jessie Marion King, and she utilizes a more limited color palette with highly stylized and symbolic flora and fauna, and an overall emphasis on the mythical or spiritual components. Her line work is extremely delicate, and her figures are very elongated. It feels like her figures can easily float or fly off of the page and into the sky. King viewed art as very spiritual, bordering on magical, and I think her illustrations are illuminated by some like mysterious lighting, kind of like stained glass rendered on a paper lantern. I find her work very emotional. Alright, so let's just compare a few components side by side amongst all four of the artists' work. Let's look at some trees. So I really love how contrasted their styles are. Arthur Rackham's very gnarled trees with the spiders, the shadowy tree roots, really reminds us of the dangers of the fairy tale world. Whereas on the other end of the spectrum, King's ethereal birch trees are like delicate reeds that really lift the imagination upwards to like the sky and the divine realm. It's like contemplating both the underworld and heaven and myth, and both are extremely important. Another side by side, the rendering of water and mermaids. Look at how each artist approaches the diffusion of light and water, how shadow is cast, how the layers of the curves and tendrils and ripples of the waves and water and floating hair are created. And I invite you to see how looking at these different photos creates different responses or effects within yourself, like different sensations. Because when you look at something, it kind of, to a certain degree, recreates some of that energy within the painting. So I think that's a very fun way to interact with this beautiful material. And lastly, if you want to look into these illustrations more, there's so many wonderful collection books that highlight the works of these artists, from the original Grimm's fairy tales to books that just focus on their artwork throughout their years and lives. Really gorgeous. And if you want to also link that to style and fashion, looking at Art Nouveau pieces is really inspiring. By the very nature of Art Nouveau, these pieces cannot be mass produced, and they're highly masterful and very expensive. So unless you can make them yourself or you have the budget for them, um, I'm going to say it's more realistic to enjoy them by looking at them. And that just brings to mind another concept. Art Nouveau was very collective in that it thought everyone should enjoy and benefit from living within beauty. And we can do that very easily nowadays just through the internet or going through public locations, museums, landscapes, like beautiful places that are open for free. We can appreciate beauty without necessarily having to own it, without having to keep it in our closets, or even without having to wear it. So that's it for today's video. I'll see you in the next one.